Good evening and welcome everybody to this regular fortnightly discussion group organised by Talking About Socialism from a Marxist point of view. This is the 40th discussion that we've held online. You can get 39 of them already up on YouTube. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please press the subscribe button so that you can get notified and you can spread news about our channel. We want to spread our views and our news and our discussions and make other people aware of them. So please press that subscribe button. And for those of you that have been here before, we now have 90 minutes or thereabouts. Tonight's discussion is basically Labour and Starmer in government the first 3 months. What's our assessment as socialists? What do we say about it? How do we respond to it? What do we want to do about it? My name is Nick Rack. I'm one of the organisers of Talking About Socialism. And tonight we've got Will McMahon, who's one of the other organisers. He's going to introduce the discussion for about 20 minutes, and then there'll be opportunity for everybody to pitch in. And I'm sure that this is a subject upon which everybody has a view. So hopefully we'll have a great discussion. Over to you, Will. Thanks.
All right. Thanks very much, Nick. So I want to start by looking at where Britain stands as Starmer's team, takes its initial steps in government. And I think compared to when Blair took power, Britain is now a much less important power, and it's struggling to maintain its position in the global order. We've now got 3 imperialist blocs, which is the European Union, China and the United States, with Britain now clinging onto the coattails of the US. Since 2008, since the crash, there's been a huge decline in living standards as the instability produced by Brexit was overlaid by the pandemic, particularly when the rich cashed in while the working class became poorer. Then the Ukraine war saw a huge inflationary pressures in energy and supermarkets and profiteering that ate into living standards through rising heating and food costs. And this is on top of the exponential rise in housing costs, primarily rents, but also mortgages over the last 25 years. So in terms of the post-war period, the working class has never had it so bad, I think the phrase would be. So a country that was deeply divided by Brexit, battered by COVID, and I think pretty embittered really by the last chaotic and corruption-ridden phase of Conservative rule, then in July elected the most unpopular new government in history, I think. Now, as I kind of outlined in my post-election introduction in July, there's a lot of detail in that introduction, so go and have a look if you want more. Only 20% of those who could vote voted Labour. Only 8% of those who voted Labour because they agreed with its policy platform. So Labour's victory in the country was very shallow, narrow, and popular support for Starmer as Prime Minister was almost non-existent. Starmer knows that the arithmetically large majority Labour has was a result of reform splitting the vote on the right. He knows that he needs to build a coalition that might get him through the next set of local elections and never mind the next general election. And this coalition has to be centred on the capitalist class because Starmer and his allies are creatures of that class. Each one of us could draw our own example of the control of capital and how it exerts it over the Labour Party. I think the most recent one that I've come across is Rachel Kite's appointment as Labour's climate envoy. Kite is the co-chair of the Climate Advisory Board on Quadrature Climate Foundation, which is linked to a hedge fund of the same name that's based in the Cayman Islands and which invests in fossil fuels. This is Labour's climate envoy, and it's just emerged that the hedge fund gave £4 million to the Labour Party just before the election. So more recently, at the main corporate event at the Labour Party conference, on the Monday of the conference, the tickets were 3,000, if you've got that. Starmer told 500 CEOs present that wealth creation is Labour's #1 mission. It's telling them that if they were struggling to get a response from government, then they should contact his office directly, presumably with a gift in hand. So we're back into the Mandelson land of being extremely relaxed about people getting filthy rich. But they're going to need more than capital's backing to win the next local elections, never mind the next general election. So what they appear to be doing is disinterring some of the key aspects of New Labour's coalition, how they built it, but in a very different context. Now, the key strategy of New Labour was to try and divide the working class, and Starmer seems to be following that path. First up is to divide the working class based on migration. Starmer prioritised a visit to see Giorgia Meloni to note what he described as a remarkable progress made by Italy in tackling the flow of migrants. And no doubt we can expect the reappearance of the Ed Miliband era mugs that called for tough immigration controls in the Labour shop. Labour will notionally at least support and laud hard-working families, while the focusing attention on those on low incomes who are not at work because of long-term illness, who Starmer has made clear he will expect them to look for work. There are authoritarian steps being offered, a crackdown on benefit cheats and a mulling over of the possibility of giving the state power to view bank accounts of those on benefits. Climate campaigners can expect to get short shrift. We can also expect a reinforced focus on antisocial behaviour to manage the ever more residualised and resource-poor existing council estates. Policing the crisis, I think, is going to come to the fore. So what Starmer's going to try and do is he's going to try and squat the centre of British politics through articulating an alliance of British capital, business unionism, and the aspiring hardworking families of the working class, the dream of home ownership being at the centre of the political strategy. It sounds familiar? Then listen to Rachel Reeves, who recently said, "To my mum, every penny mattered, and the basic test for whoever is Chancellor is to bring that attitude to our public finances." Now, this is a near copy of Margaret Thatcher's messaging on strategy in 1979. Labour came to power on a meaningless programme of change and on an end to the shambolic and corrupt government, and for a few lightweight ameliorative reforms. They claim because the Tories have busted the finances. Now, had Starmer been honest, the election slogan should have been "things can only get worse," or even "things are going to get pretty ugly." Unlike Blair, Starmer comes into government in a much worse economic situation, tied to bourgeois economic orthodoxy. In his conference speech, Starmer talked of a shared struggle, the best a speechwriter could come up with, in an attempt to avoid the comparison with Cameron's post-crash "we're all in it together." So the anti-working class direction of the government is clear enough. There will be £20 billion worth of spending cuts to come year on year, come what may. So has this been reflected in the first 3 months in power? It's not quite 100 days, unfortunately, but first 3 months in power. In Oliver Eagleton's book, The Starmer Project, Starmer was described as a tone-deaf technocrat with a charisma bypass and with few ideas to rub together, and as simply as a vessel for capital's interests. Starmer's response to the racist mobilisations and attempted pogroms in the summer was to tell Labour MPs not to join the anti-racist assemblies and to attempt to depoliticise the events by describing them as street thuggery, rather than what they were, a political intervention by the far right. He was eventually outflanked to his left by all of the mainstream media, including the Daily Express, who saw the danger of handing the initiative to the left, and so for the most part welcomed the national turnout that the left led against Robinson and co. Starmer missed the mood completely. More recent revelations of the role of Lord Ali as a gift provider in general to Starmer and Rayner, and let us not forget he is the son of a toolmaker and she a single mother, has shown the leadership defending the indefensible, with Wed Streeting doubling down by arguing, and I quote, "People who give to political parties are showing the same philanthropic spirit as people who give to charity. I think this is actually a noble pursuit. I think it's a good thing to do." It's an extraordinary quote. More damage, though, will be done by the key economic and social policy decisions made by the government. the refusal to remove the two-child benefit cap, echoing New Labour's cut to lone parent benefit in '97, and Prime Minister Starmer's view that the long-term ill should look for work shows a willingness to kick down on those who need support most. However, I think it's the removal of the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, not on benefits, that is a signal policy for the future. There's nobody who thinks the winter fuel payment cut is necessary in terms of immediate national budget. Not even the Institute of Fiscal Studies or the FT believe it was necessary in order to reassure the markets, a line that Reeves got her junior ministers to parrot, hoping that people would remember the disastrous quasi-Kwarteng budget. Labour's ruling class allies didn't need it. They need no reassurance that Starmer is here to do their bidding. Whatever the Labour Party conference votes for, they know it. He is their man. The winter fuel payment cut really presages a broader strategy of mean-tested and residualisation, and a final assault on what remains of the universalism of the post-war welfare state. While the grave of the post-war settlement was dug by the coalition, Starmer's role is that of the undertaker, who will roll the corpse in, fill it, and pat down the soil. Starmer will residualise every state service for those who are not, Starmer will residualise every state service to be for just those who are on benefits, and to shrink the national and local state further. If you're not on state benefits, you're about to enter a world of an ever-vanishing national and local state via privatisation. The only part of the state that will survive the process will be its armed wing, policing, prisons, border force, security services, and the military. Wherever you look, residualisation and privatisation will be key. So we could probably have a discussion about what the examples might be. Some I came up with were free prescriptions for those who are over 60. Really, they should be rationalised up to the pension age. Why should those who are over 60 and in work and in well-paid jobs not pay for their prescriptions? It's obvious, isn't it? One way of overcoming pressures on the GP would be levy a small fee for every visit for those not on benefits. This will stop the worried well making their way to the GP and bunging up GPs for people who really need them. There may be tax exemptions for those who decide to exercise the choice of private care by government, offering tax incentives for those who choose a private provider. All around us, we see adverts for different forms of private healthcare. This will be incentivised so that the cash-strapped NHS can focus on those with the least income. And it will be argued, what's wrong with that? Local government, the local state entity charged with community support, is now on the verge of implosion. It will solely focus on the essentials, that of elderly care, young people in care, because social care is the main call on its budget. These and all other services will be residualised to those out of work or on pensions or on disability benefits or children. Other services will become fully chargeable. Many are already charged for, a basic like garden bin collection. And why not? People with gardens are mostly better off. They should be paying for that kind of thing. Normal waste collection bins will be reduced in frequency or charge if you need an extra bin. This is a good environmental strategy to stop people throwing stuff away. Local libraries will become a thing of the past, or maybe run by volunteers. That's the big society, the community being involved in providing knowledge. Youth services will be residualised to those in contact with the criminal justice system. The harder you look, and I had this experience actually when I was thinking about what I was going to say, the harder you look for the remains of the post-war settlement, the more soon you realise that it's barely visible in most people's lives and threadbare for those who need it. So as well as being the undertaker, Starmer's role is to formalise through legislation the new post-welfare consensus, which I think will look remarkably like what we see across the pond in the United States. The only nut he has to crack is that of the triple lock on pensions, the new sacred cow, because basically the NHS is being privatised in 1,000 ways and it will be gone. The question this leaves us is to think about is the state of the working class and its ability to respond. And I really kind of hope that this is what our discussion will focus on. I think we all know it's not looking good. The political direction of travel of the Labour government and the Labour Party is to resume the path that Blairism set out in 1997, to heal the split at the end of the 19th century between political liberalism and political labourism, and to finally transform the party into a US-type Democrat party with the backing of business unionism and capital. I mean, I would expect, to be honest, an unofficial Lib-Lab pact before the next election. So we have to think about what that means in terms of working class organisation. The working class is much less organised force than it was just under half a century ago. In 1979, there were 13.5 million workers in trade unions, over a third of the workforce. Today, there are 5.5 million workers, just about a fifth. 8 out of 10 workers are not in a union. For the most part, the most radicalised and politicised section of the working class has left the Labour Party without having found another political home to go to. There are millions of disaffected and unorganised working class people who will look for solutions to their own social crisis in the next period. The question is to which political force will they turn? We have seen the dangers in the AfD, and we've seen the dangers with Le Pen. And yesterday, the Freedom Party in Austria, which was formed by former SS officers in the 1950s, also won the election. And we've also seen the dangers of Trumpism. There is no guarantee that a section of the working class will not turn to the far right if the socialist left is not able to offer a radical solution to the social crisis our class faces before the next general election. I don't think we're on the verge of fascism, but I do think that the section of the working class which doesn't feel represented and isn't part of the Labour movement is much, much more vulnerable to the messages from reform, which is infested with the far right. So, for example, the message of the far right is support our pensioners, not migrants. They're going to counterpose in this fashion on every policy question, and we have to have a platform and we have to have a programme that can offer something different. This is not going to be possible from the ward party meetings in the Labour Party. It is obvious an alternative pole of attraction is needed. We need to organise for the creation of a new kind of mass party of the working class with socialist politics. The question is how do we do that?
Thank you very much, Will. That was a very comprehensive and detailed introduction covering a huge array of issues and posing some stark questions there at the end. So can I see who wants to come in? And I hope we'll see lots of hands. As I said earlier, everybody in this meeting will have an opinion about Starmer and hopefully have an opinion about what we might do to face the challenges that Will's just dealt with at the end of his talk. So can I see who wants to come in? It doesn't have to be a full contribution. It can be questions. Okay.
We have Matthew, Nick.
Okay, Matthew. Sorry, yeah, can you come in? I didn't see you.
All right. Hi, comrades. Thanks for that. And thanks to Will. That's a very good, comprehensive summary of what's going on. I think the thing about Starmer, of course, is that, I mean, actually, of course, winter fuel payment is a Gordon Brown thing. You know, it's actually one of those things that Blair was able to offer. You know, under the conditions. I mean, given the economic conditions, they were able to offer a few things. And this government, of course, it has made it very clear that it is offering nothing or less than nothing. And the other thing, of course, is that Starmer himself, of course, does not understand. I mean, Blair understood, you know, you get your rewards afterwards, you know, you get your millions afterwards, you know, I mean, that's how he did it. Whereas Starmer, of course, has got his hand out all the time, which does make it very difficult for him under conditions in which, I mean, Blair understood how to operate politically, to present himself and present ideas and so on and so forth, and a certain way of doing it. Whereas, of course, Starmer's got none of that. Starmer doesn't like people. He doesn't like interacting with people. He can't present his ideas very well. And basically what they've said is, well, you know, we're a government and we'll make sure that you lot get nothing. You know, so essentially the problem they're going to run into is they're going to become savagely unpopular, hated, in fact, within a fairly short space of time. And that's going to affect them a lot. And I don't think Starmer is going to last 5 years. I suspect Starmer is going to get the boot from the Labour Party. The Labour Party will remove him on the grounds that obviously they are going to be so unpopular that they are going to be so in fear of the response of the public if he's allowed to carry on, because he's so inept. I mean, you know, besides the fact, obviously, the savage program they have, he's also incredibly inept. He's very bad at actual bourgeois politics. So, I mean, in those terms, I think that, you know, it's going to get really quite rough. Now, the problem is, of course, that as you say, is that the left is not organised and cannot present at this point any political alternative. And this is the key question. And if you look at what's happening in the likes of the meeting of Collective, which happened a couple of weeks ago, of course, is essentially, of course, is basically you've got two issues. One, that of course most of these people are reformists, and they don't want to break politically with the Labour Party, particularly in the case of Corbyn. Actually, they don't want to break organisation politically from the Labour Party. And as reformists, of course, the problem is they don't have anything very much to offer either. Because obviously the ruling class, at the back of this, the ruling class has made it absolutely clear it will not concede. And in fact, what it wants is a government that will actually steadily destroy even more, as you say, of the social provision for society in general. And it's not just the working class. I mean, the point is, I mean, the actual infrastructure of the country is in a state of naked decay. Everybody can see it, you know. Okay, right, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. As some of you will know, we try to limit people's contributions to 3 minutes, bit of flexibility, obviously, but it's so that we can get as many voices in as possible. If people don't want to come in, we'll go around and people can come back in a second time. I've got Soraya's hand, so I'll take her now, but I'm sure that that there are more contributions, so be thinking about what you might want to say or what question you might want to ask Will, and we'll call him back in if necessary. So, Soraya.
Yeah, I've got questions really rather than a contribution. It's why so soon? I know when Starmer was desperate and the party was desperate to get elected, that there was all this, we're going to, not overtly, but the message, we're going to do the job for you to capitalism, so you don't need to worry about us getting elected. And but where is that just a continuation in Starmer's and his cohort's mind that they've got to carry on impressing capitalism? I just don't understand the need, the urgent need at the moment with such a compliant union bureaucracy, that there's any fear that there's going to be any sort of mass demonstrations or strikes that are going to kick off, that they feel that they've got the confidence to not just make a few, not talking about massive reforms, but mumble things, that they don't even feel the need to do that. And yet at the same time, I don't really understand where the pressure is for them to take this authoritarian position and to go for the jugular from the outset with the heating issue. So it's really what do you think is driving that beyond their own desperate self-interest to I mean, they're in the honeymoon period, but it's just not happening, is it? So I just wondered what you think the reason is for that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's a really good question. I've got Greg and then Steve. So, Greg, if you unmute yourself.
Thanks, Nick. And thanks, Will, for your presentation. I just wanted to observe two things that I'm not sure if I picked up that you mentioned. Number one is in regard to the public sector pay deals, which obviously that's that's probably the biggest, if you can call it a win. It's not really a win as much as a cutting of losses, isn't it, really? But the biggest sort of net gain in any respect so far in the first 3 months. And contextually, I think that's important while we're heading into a budget with them speaking openly about making difficult decisions and all that sort of carry on. That's likely to be used as political ammunition against the government. So the second thing that I wanted to pick up on as well is the likelihood that we're going to be seeing increased taxes from that forthcoming budget. And that sounds, obviously it's sort of crystal ball gazing at this point, but it sounds like we're probably going to see personal taxes being increased possibly quite significantly. That also potentially plays into the hands of, that's political ammunition again, from handed to the right, handed to the Conservative Party to be used against Labour, in the context where there's this vanishing welfare state, as well, very comprehensively set out. So whereas I suppose 14 years ago we were in a situation where we, as socialist radical left, were sort of reluctantly verging into this discourse of we should be raising taxes and spending from the public budget, which isn't really a radical proposition to be making. We're potentially looking at the same, a reset of the same political arguments. And I just wondered, therefore, if anyone has any thoughts or ideas on how we avoid lapsing into that kind of Keynesian public policy statement making, sloganeering, which doesn't actually further our own politics in terms of setting out a need for radical change and for revolution ultimately.
Thanks very much, Greg. Really good question there. The danger that constantly faces the left, including the Marxist left, is how do you make sure you maintain your program and not basically collapse into ideas or policies that aren't going to solve the crises. Steve Forrest and then Janet, please.
Thanks very much.
Oh, sorry, and then
Will,
I've got Jeff Barr as well. So Steve.
cool. Yeah, firstly, Will, thank you very much. A really good introduction. Can also say to the organisers, I think to get to 40 is an excellent thing, and I got invited to these meetings, and it's been really enjoyable. I think they've always been friendly, and they are good discussions. And there's not many outlets, so I still maintain that, even though we're all back in person everywhere. There's not a lot of outlets, so it's really good to have this as an outlet. I hope that's not taken off my 3 minutes or them.
You get extra.
Comments
You get extra for that, Steve.
Oh, thank you very much. Anyway, I think the first point to make is, I think everyone's made really interesting points, but I think the first point to make is they're really bad politicians. They're really quite shocking. Just a fellow at work said to me, why are they flagging up for 2 months in advance of the budget that they want to cut the winter fuel payment? Just why are they doing that? And some of the behaviours is nothing better than sort of NUS sort of student politics that they've basically never grown out of. So I think we have to contextualise that. Just as an anecdote as well, which is kind of some of you may know that I have a claim to fame of being thrown out of the Labour Party conference in 2005. I found it quite interesting last week. I was thrown out. There was an uproar from delegates at the conference. I was on the national media, the Japanese TV, the BBC News, Vanessa Feltz. It was never ending. And my Union General Secretary, amongst others, put pressure on the Conference Arrangements Committee to force our return, me and Walter Wolfgang. And we had an apology from the Prime Minister and the Chair of the party, Ian McCartney. I just found it interesting last week. It told a story, I think, for me anyway, and on an anecdotal basis, that a young lad was thrown out of the conference. It was literally a moment in passing. There was no protest from any delegates as far as I can see. There was no media apart from like straight away there. There was never going to be an apology from Starmer or any of his gang. And this guy, trust me, if he's not already been expelled, he's been suspended. So I think just to look at how far we've come, and I, as you know, am still a party member and I have a certain perspective, how long that will last, or both of those things will last, who knows. But and you know, the reason I attend these meetings is I am open for those discussions. But I just think it shows you, at least on that level, how far we have come. As far as Starmer is concerned, I mean, to alienate, you know, we have to remember he only polled, you know, whatever it was, 10.4 million, which is the lowest. I can't remember the figures. Will's probably got them, but you know, it's like the second lowest ever of a Labour government coming to power or something. It's certainly about 3 million less than Blair in '97, and that's his coalition. That's the level of his coalition. Now, if you can't maintain that coalition even in the first 3 months, you are in trouble. And although I agree with Will, we're probably not going to see fascism. The problem is, if Starmer's not able to answer even the basic issues of providing heating for older people in the winter, and providing you know, the 2-child cap, and you know, the spectacle of suspending MPs and everything else like that. And we have to, you know, we just have to say this as well. You know, it's 1.4 billion we're talking about. We had an MP speak in our union branch meeting, and he was talking about, you know, this is all part of the plan to get the 22 billion spent, you know, and everything. You pay 1.4 billion, and then the following morning, I'm reading that David Lammy's given 650 million to finance the arming and the bombing of, you know, of the Ukraine. That's half the money for the pensioners, right? So I think the problem is, if Starmer's even to the limited sort of left of centre, bourgeois, whatever we label we disinterest and discussion will put upon him, if he can't satisfy those basic needs, the real problem is none of us can predict where it ends, but the door will then be open to the far right. That's the danger. And the Financial Times had an article, I'll finish on this, even the Financial Times had an article, and I can find it and post it to people, a couple of months back, that basically said Starmer was the last bastion for that door being open. And if that's the opinion of the Financial Times, then I think we're in trouble. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Steve. It's noticeable just on one of the points you made there that one of the driving forces that's being utilised by the far right in Germany and Austria and elsewhere is opposition to the war and the money that's being spent on the war in the face of austerity and cuts. I'm going to call in Janet, and then I've got Jeff Barr.
Oh, thanks. The cat started to shriek. Thanks, Will. That was comprehensive. I think the only parts maybe you didn't talk about was foreign policy that much. Perhaps you can say something about that later. I think going back to what Soraya asked, and really Steve and Matthew talked about, I think what is surprising to me anyway is how inept politically they are. I mean, I think we all know Starmer's politically not a politician. He's not a machine politician. He's not a politician, but one would have thought the people around him would have had more political nous, and clearly they don't have. So just going back to Will's point about residualisation of public services, I'm sure that's right. I mean, the list was frightening. I don't think they will go that far. I mean, I don't think they'll go that far directly. Some things will happen anyway. I mean, things like they're clearly not going to provide funding for local government. So all the things you talked about, particularly around social care, I think, will happen because there's no way out of that. but I think there will be some. I mean, what Reeves has been saying, and she said it before the election, during the election, a year ago, is around investment. And in the budget, there will be so-called investment into infrastructure and so on. I mean, it's very clear, though, that they will do that through some kind of, PFI, PPP, Mark II. So but they won't not do it. I mean, they've said they're going to do it. I mean, I think the other thing that's surprising is what Soraya said. Why did they, apart from being inept, apart from being what they think is they're entitled, and they haven't received scrutiny in the run-up to the election the year before, why did they do the pensioners, the fuel allowance? I don't understand that, and I think it is something that, we need to ask. Was it just a political error, or was it on purpose? Because if it was, it makes no sense at all. Particularly, they must have known that, well, clearly they didn't even think about the freebies. They didn't think they were going to be scrutinized about that, because if they did, how could they have not seen the backlash when you look at the two things? And I'm just going on just very, very quickly about how does the left respond. There has been a huge backlash about the fuel allowance. So this is going to happen again and again, I think, if they're going to do even some of the things you're talking about. So do we clearly have to take part in those, that response and that resistance. And how do we do that whilst putting forward a different program, which is, I guess, what Greg was saying. I don't know the answers to any of that.
Great
That's
point.
it.
Great points, Janet. Thanks. Jeff.
Yeah, a number of points, I think. Yeah, Will's introduction was good. A lot of material there. I mean, we've got the arrogance of power, but it is fundamentally hollow on this tiny vote. And most of those who voted for Labour didn't want the Tories, and that was about it. But despite that, they face rising expectations, and they can't get away from that despite their best endeavours. The question of tax, I realised over the struggle over the poll tax that what Marx pointed out was that a crisis of the state over taxation has been fundamental to revolutions. It's not some trivial point to be fudged or avoided, that the refusal of large bodies of the public to pay more tax, faced with obvious social crisis and obvious state crisis, is a very much more serious thing than the traditional left have ever recognised. The ineptness of these politicians is tied to something else, which is the collapse of social democracy. They have no vision. The nearest thing we had to a vision was Corbyn, and of course it was the vision of 1945, not much more, presented as some wild, crazed left-wing idea and suitably crushed by the state. I think that we're not faced with fascism. We're faced with new factors on the far right, which need to be understood in their own right. Fascism came out of World War I, and it is not coming back in that form. There are no insignia, uniforms, black shirts. It's a new form of the far right that we have to get to grips with in our understanding. The way forward, we clearly need some kind of unified working class stroke socialist response. And that's our big weakness, that we know what we're against, and people will turn out to fight against the far right. They'll turn out to fight against all sorts of things. But we need a positive policy. I wish I had it, but thanks.
Thanks very much, Jeff. I've got Matthew wants to come back in again, but can I see if anybody else wants to come in before I get before I call in Matthew? Okay, I'm going to take Matthew, and then I'm going to ask Will to come back in and to deal with some of these points before I go round for another call. So Matthew.
Yeah, so some brief points, I think. I mean, the other thing, of course, is obviously Starmer's enthusiasm for imperialism and his desire to start World War III, which he's been lobbying to do by firing missiles at Russia without any notion that obviously the Russians would fire missiles back at him and the rest of us. You know, and of course, his the fact he is a Zionist without any issue, as he said himself, he will support Israel to whatever butchery, murder, torture, etc. it does. So there's that. The other thing, of course, is as people said, the rise of the far right, which is clearly being promoted. If you see what, say, Reform did here in Glasgow, they stood effectively ghost candidates, people we don't know actually exist at all. They all gave addresses in England, which is not an offence, but none of them appeared, so we don't know if they actually exist. And they gave false addresses for their agents. If you say here, the address of the local hardware store up the road here was given as the Reform agent address. Now, if anybody else had done this, of course they would have been had up. But of course, this allowed Reform actually to get more votes in this city than the Tories. In many cases. So obviously that point is being promoted. The other thing about Starmer, I think, of course, is he is a deeply repressive man, and this is a deeply repressive regime, and we can see now, obviously, the effort. The fact that if you try and commit mass murder by burning hotels, you'll get a certain amount of time in the jail. If they catch you. If you're a Just Stop Oil protester and you go on a Zoom call, you can get more than that, 5 years. If you happen to be a Palestine protester, you can now get charged under the Terrorism Act 2000, gratis Blair, and you can get 14 years. Basically, and we're now seeing a chunk of people being thrown in jail for various offences arising from Palestine. I think we've got about 6 or 7 people in Scotland so far have been jailed for protests to do with Palestine, mostly around the arms factories in these parts, and doubtless we'll see more. And they are very keen, obviously, as we can see also, they're very keen on jailing journalists. We can see the repression against the likes of Richard Medhurst, Sarah Wilkinson, etc., etc. So this is a deeply repressive regime. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Matthew. Will, I'm going to invite you now to come back and deal with some of those points, some of those questions, direct questions. What's your opinion about why Starmer and Reeves and the government have acted so precipitately in showing what they mean to do, and in a sense laying down their gauntlet so soon is one of the points, but there were quite a number of other points as well.
All right. I'll get through what I can get through, and then we can go for another round. Yeah.
Sure.
You see, I agree. I mean, Starmer is an absolutely useless politician, and he is a vessel. He is a vessel for the ruling class, which is why I don't think that they're concerned about his allegiance or him having to prove himself to them. I think he just is. But I don't think that means that he's a person without a program, in a sense, and a person without a policy and doesn't have direction. And I think one of the points I was trying to make, and it perhaps didn't come out clearly enough, is that the point about the cut to the winter fuel allowance is it's to make it clear to people who are not on benefits that they're on their own. And it's to apply a principle that the residualized welfare state is only for those on benefits, and everything is going to go. And I think the reason why they set out on this path, I think the reason why they've done it to pensioners is because you've got to start somewhere, actually. And I don't think it's about the money. I think it's about the principle. And I think you've got to start somewhere. And I think that that's where the first layer of trying that argument out and seeing if it settles. I think you have to remember that Thatcher did loads of things that people bloody hated. actually, and got away with it, obviously in quite different circumstances. But I think they've got a program of reform that they're going to have to work their way through to produce the post-welfare neoliberal state. That will be a settled state for the next period. So I think it's just the start, actually. I think the reason why they didn't, and it's a clear political signal, I think the reason why they gave into the inverted commas to the trade unions and they agreed the pay cuts is because the pay salary increases was partly because they're not stupid, actually, and they didn't want to take on too much. They didn't want to get into a tangle that early on. And those of you who are old enough to remember the Thatcher government will know that Thatcher tried to take on the miners in 81, 82. And there's a famous interview where John Biffen was on being interviewed about it. And this guy collapsed on camera, really. He was shaking. And it was clear that they weren't ready for them. They hadn't got their ducks in a row. So they went away and reorganized and came back 2 years later. And I think that we will see in the pay round coming up how they think they're posed to challenge the working class. So I just don't think they were ready for it. And I think they accepted it, that they weren't ready for it. That's my view. And I think it's easier to kick down. It's easier to kick pensioners, than to get into a struggle with the trade union movement that's been very active in defence of its own interests, the railway workers and the junior doctors. I think that's what was happening. Because it doesn't make any sense in terms of finances, because it's just such a pitifully small amount of money in terms of the budget. I mean, any kind of reasonably social democratic, even a kind of a rightist social democratic government could go, okay, we're going to have a 1% wealth tax on millionaires, right? And you see this all the time on Facebook, right? Tax the millionaires. And I always reply, no, sequestrate them, take their profit off them, because that's what we should be doing. This discussion about tax, but even from their perspective, 1% tax on the millionaires and the billionaires paid annually for 5 years would bring in 260 billion. I mean, it's extraordinary. They're just not prepared to go down that route. And I think it's because they are preparing for a full assault and they're making it clear the direction in which they're traveling. I think Starmer, he might not survive it. I don't know, he might. But the direction is clear for me. The other thing I'd like to say about the discussion about the far right is, of course, Farage voted against the winter fuel cuts, and made it clear he'd voted against them, and he said stop attacking pensioners. So he made that very, very clear, and so he kind of exposed them, and I think he's building a base that will strengthen if we're not careful. I think that in terms of the foreign policy, what we've seen basically over the last period, and I mean last 70 years, is following Suez and the debacle of Suez, where the Americans really did for the British and the French by saying we don't support what you're doing by landing troops there, a layer of the British ruling class decided that building a European Union and joining in the European Union was the way to go to defend British interests. Sometime later, another layer, the finance capital layer, decided that Brexit was better. And I think in response to the Brexit vote, Starmer is left with a return to Atlanticism, which is, just following the United States wherever it goes. Because in this new kind of world order he faces, he's got to tag. Britain has got to be part of something. And the only option left, I think, for them is the Atlanticism with the United States. One other point about Starmer and his repressive nature, I think it's really interesting to note that I think New Labour was equally repressive. New Labour did some really bad things in terms of antisocial behaviour. New Labour doubled the prison population. It doubled the youth population in prison and more. It was the Conservatives that closed down both youth jails in the last period. They were decarcerationists. It's incredible. Look at the data, it's incredible. But there's been this kind of authoritarian streak through New Labour. Starmer, CPS, was the person that jailed people in 2011 with rigour and vigour and pushed up the prison population again. And I think if he could do it now, he would, right? If he could do more, if he could be more authoritarian, he would. But the problem they've got is they're running out of prison spaces. And interestingly, last week, the company that builds most of the prisons, the ISG, has collapsed, has gone into financial liquidation. So that's going to slow down their prison building program. But expect prisons to be built, expect Starmer to lock people up, and expect him to build on Jack Straw's legislation, which ended up with a 12-year-old being punished for being involved in the far-right riots, which I just think is absolutely bloody ridiculous. I don't want to preempt what I'm going to say at the end, but what we need is a series of political demands that's put together that says, what would we do if we were in government? We need a program that explains to people what we would do, but we can perhaps discuss what that might look like and come back to it.
Okay, thanks very much, Will. Again, extremely comprehensive response to the first round of comments and questions. Can I see if anybody else wants to come in at this moment? Richard.
Thank you, Will, for an excellent presentation and for your further points there. I mean, asking the question, what is to be done, Chernyshevsky's question, which was, of course, answered in Russia, is always important for us. But linked with that is the question, too, of who is to be doing it. Because even if we can get clear upon what we need to do, how to organise ourselves so that something actually happens, rather than endless discussion circles where we talk about our impotence, is something we need to clarify. I must say, first of all, although several speakers have spoken about the Labour Party as though it is an organisation that has had something to offer the working class, and many workers have seen the Labour Party in that light. I myself have never seen the Labour Party like that at all. I can't see it ever drifted away from its alliance with liberalism. I know the talk has been different, but the trade union movement in Britain has always been in bed with imperialism, very clearly with British imperialism, when Britain was the centre of the capitalist world. And certainly, as we all know, in the 1930s, trade union leaders were openly talking about their goal to get the bosses to share the imperial gains with them. They had no support at all for colonial peoples trying to free themselves from British imperialism. They just wanted to get on board with the exploiting class. Similarly, I know that when we talk about the labour movement, the focus is mainly upon trade unions. And Nick has just mentioned some trade union fightbacks that have been taking place recently. But trade unionism pretty much has degenerated into a service sector, hasn't it? Pretty much like an insurance company. Something like the RAC for jobs. If your job breaks down, call somebody from the union to sort you out. Certainly, if employers are not playing the game of a fair wage, a fair day's pay for a fair day's work, the motto of European social democracy, then unions will step in. But I've always found and seen trade unionism as being a significant barrier to socialist organisation, because they stand for an alternative relationship between the working class and capital. And the trade union leaderships, of course, dedicate themselves to that. I mean, we see this very clearly with Unite at the moment, who have revived the old trade union model of what a trade union should be. They do the politics, we do the trade unionism. Now, who's going to do this stuff? I mean, honestly, the land out there is dreadful, isn't it? Organised Trotskyism is completely sectarian. Both SPEW and the SWP already believe themselves to be the party, and all we have to do is organise around them. And it's impossible to have any kind of sensible political discussion with them about the way to move forward. The fragments of the CP in its various forms are asleep. Now, of course, the CPGB PCC, of course, are a slightly different case, and I'll say something about that in a moment. The People's Forums don't work. Yep, I'll be quick. I'll wind up. People's Forums don't work. Collective is hopeless, isn't it? And it is, at best, wanting to repeat Corbyn's failure. which was a very significant failure. I think people are too kind with Corbyn, letting him off the hook, just saying he's a victim of the state. Of course, he made gross political mistakes. The most important being, of course, giving Johnson the 2019 election, which ended Corbyn and put Johnson into very clear power. So I won't add other things at the moment because I have my minutes. But not only do we need to work out what to do, which is the question of programme, but also how we're going to find a body of people to do it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Richard. Great points. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in myself for 3 minutes. I'll put my timer on so I don't abuse my position. But those of you that follow my Facebook page and also my contributions at these discussions will know that I regularly and repeatedly bang the same drum, and that is what TAS is about, is the need for a united communist or a united socialist party. And I think we've got to continue to put that out as a call. It won't find very much echo in the leadership of some of these organizations who are led by ego and sectarianism, but it may find some resonance with members, even long-term members. I sometimes get favorable responses. But we've thought for a long time, those of us that have organized talking about socialism, that there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people out there who have been through some sort of Marxist organization, who are interested in Marxism, who read some Marx, who aren't satisfied with the idea of a continuation of capitalism, and would be interested in a party that makes its calling card, if you like, the complete break with capitalism. And we just have to find a way of organizing those people. So first of all, we have to find them. We have to reach out to them. We have to try to organize them. And it may seem as if, we're trying to climb Everest without any gear, without any clothing or anything. But actually, there's no alternative.
Yeah.
Because I agree with the people that have said, we're not facing the squadristas of Italian fascism. But what we are facing is the possibility of forming a government. If it can happen in France, if it can happen in Italy, if it can happen in Austria, if it can happen in states in Germany, Britain is not necessarily a complete exception. And Farage and Reform were second, I think, in something like 92 places where Labour won.
Yeah.
So it's quite possible that if, as we see, Starmer continues to disappoint, that in the absence of an alternative from the left, that Reform will grow, because those slogans are very, very powerful. Don't attack the pensioners, blame the migrants. There's no party, including Labour and sections of the trade unions, they don't say who's really responsible. And so there's no answer to these arguments. We have to form the nucleus, the embryo, the start of that sort of party. My time's up, so I'm going to leave it there for now. And I see Soraya's got her hand up, so I'm going to call in Soraya. Please, there are others who I'm sure have got things to say. So please do put your hand up, even if it's only to ask a question or make a single simple point. Soraya.
Yes, in my view, we need to completely change the system that governs the planet, which means getting rid of capitalism, not tinkering with it. And it's a question of, we need a party to do that. And I haven't had any illusions in the Labour Party. I don't consider that it has ever been socialist, or despite what might have been claimed in the past, it never had the aim of actually getting rid of the capitalist system. But historically, it's been an amazing weapon for controlling the working class in this country. and so it cannot be ignored. And so keeping an eye on what is going, because why? Because it is seen as the party of the working class coming from the trade unions. And so historically there has been, workers have turned to the party, they vote for it in elections, but also we've seen moments when they've actually gone in en masse in the party. And again, no illusions in Corbyn. Corbyn is a reformist, and he does not see, I don't, in my view, a life really outside the Labour Party. And although he attended that meeting of Collective, he didn't say he was going to start anything himself. And I think he'd be terrified of doing that. But it's a question of what do we do? And other comrades have said we need to, in my view, if nobody else is building that party, then we have got to build it. And that's not going to be easy, and it isn't easy, but there is no alternative, because whilst it's right, as another comrade said, that we haven't got the brown shirts on the streets or likely to be next week, the insidious growth of far-right policies and ideas, and these parties that are much more overtly far-right than they've dared to be in the past, is really just a hint of what is possible in the future. And I don't think you necessarily, I'm not saying we're on the verge of it, but I think we've got to be extremely careful, because I don't think you necessarily have to have a wall for that to develop. So it's really, and Nick said this, but just to finish, I think that we are not, I'd like to think I'm unique, but we are not unique in that I think that there are many of us out there who share our views, but is a question of getting in touch with them. Sorry, Nick, of getting in touch with them and building from these small numbers without being grandiose, but just and making the links that we can.
Thanks, Soraya. I've got John Fitzgerald.
Yeah, hi all. Yeah, very good lead off, Will, and some interesting points made by and others. Yeah, I'll actually be affected by this pension cut myself. Me and my wife will lose £200. Yeah, I mean it's I think the thing with Corbyn is that the populism of it all in relation to, you know, the reforms that supposedly, you know, he would have made, or they would have made if they got in, is I think people are still, this is why the Collective and various other groups and forums and all the rest of them, everybody's, I think, actually kind of trying to build a populism around somebody or something. And it's not happening. It's, I mean, Galloway was quite popular once, but they all seem to have, you know, fallen apart really. And so, any kind of, you know, party that we're thinking of building is, it's going to be exceptionally difficult in this age of populism. I mean, reform is, you know, all about populism. Yeah, I kind of trying to, you know, look at some aspect of how we draw, how we get people in, draw people in, and without having to promise them immediate things. You know, you need some. The idea of our party would be a Marxist party, so it would be looked at in that respect. So we'd be looking at the world in the dialectical way, and being able to put arguments forward on that basis. Yeah, I mean, as I say, it's difficult. I think this Starmer is. I was a bit surprised. His vanity. I mean, the fact of actually getting all these. Every time I look at him now, I'll be wondering, well, you know, is he wearing one of those suits? One of these designer suits? His wife wearing a designer suit? Yeah,
John?
I don't know. Crazy.
Thanks, John. Thank you very much. I've got Minnie.
Yeah, just quickly, people with
Can't hear you, Minnie.
sorry, I didn't press hard enough. The red line didn't go. Did press it? Right. Your time starts now.
Yeah.
One thing that people have been saying, what are Labour going to do? There's Prem Seeker is a Labour lord. He says that Labour are planning to build new reservoirs, sewage systems costing billions in private finance initiative, funded by customers and taxpayers, water companies to collect profits. Each £1 of PFI money will lead to £5 to £6 repayment. It's shocking. It's shocking. We saw that in the NHS. One of the big reasons, obviously, we all know that the NHS is in trouble, is because the cost of paying to the corporations, the PFI finance initiative, renting the hospitals, basically, a lot of them. Yet the rise of the far right, there is a celebrity kind of far right, isn't there? The Yaxley Lennon. But I think a lot of people are getting the messages from the media. Someone was saying that, I think it was Matthew, that a lot of the candidates Reform put up, or a few of them, didn't exist, and they were just addresses for a local hardware store. Well, there was a far right demo planned in Liverpool for the weekend, Saturday, come to the dock, and 5 people turned up. So, you know, how many of them are there? I think we're being manipulated by a ruling class of bankers. And I think Starmer's probably part of that. One of the reasons he did the pension thing, well, one obvious reason as part of it, is he can take the whip off any slightly left Labour MPs, which he's done with, is it John McDonnell, Azar Sultana, Richard Bergen, is it? So he can do that. Means tested. I like the way somebody took the S up, but you will mean tested, and it is mean. Yeah. I'm interested in the word residualization. Does that mean, like, when they say care in the community, like they're going to get rid of big hospitals and you'll just have a small little poxy thing in the community which doesn't really work? But you know, this idea that it will only be people on benefits who will be able to access those things. Well, he doesn't want people on benefits. He wants everyone to work, even if they're too ill to work. Starmer wants them to work. He doesn't seem to get it, does he? That interview with Beth Rigby, he really doesn't see how the public perceive him and his largesse and his privilege. Yeah, and he's a total liar, obviously. I don't know how people fell for him. Yeah, apparently the government that's in power now, the Starmer government, has been giving the okay to spy planes. I think somebody revealed it on Twitter yesterday, to fly over Lebanon, Beirut. A lot of the intelligence may be coming from that. But yes, he is hawkish. He is a hawkish imperialist, Starmer, and I think the Americans, so some sections of the left are saying, are trying to dial it down. They want out of Ukraine, but then they've got Starmer wanting to, you know, but send missiles to allow missiles to be fired into Russia from Ukraine. I don't know if that's true. That was interesting. Jeff Barr's point about tax and revolutions. Return of the Sausages. I mean, he's completely inept, isn't he? He's absolutely. They put him there. I don't think they want him there. They want him there for long. Yeah, there's probably other stuff, but I've got a load of scribble here. We do need a party of the left, a Marxist party. We really do. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Minnie. Well, I think at the end of the year, we've just added a session on what sort of party do we need. That's going to be the last session of the year, and maybe we will be able to go into what practical steps we can take in detail in that discussion. Can I see if there's anybody else that wants to come in to make any points or add any points? Richard, do you want to come back? Richard?
Yes, please.
Yeah, and then I've got John again.
Yes, I just wanted to add briefly that I agree with the point that you were making, Nick, that we cannot think that the threat of some form of British fascism is necessarily far away. I mean, all one has to do is look at what happened in Italy, of course, how the fascists took over there. Certainly in Germany in 1928, the Nazi Party was a tiny fragment of leftover squaddies who wanted to refight the First World War. They were of marginal significance, and it was the economic wave that broke over Germany so terribly in 1929 and 1930 that that really was the platform upon which the Nazis were able to stand and grow. And of course, many German workers turned to the Nazi Party rather than support the either social democracy or the Communist Party, who were both well established in Germany. But we know why that didn't succeed. I think Nick, you made the point. Nick and Will made the point very clearly that ADF is extremely strong in supposedly former socialist East Germany. In Austria, we've just seen a shocking victory of pretty overt fascists. Le Pen's party is very large in France, of course, and is, after years of growth, is not on the verge of cracking up at all. And of course, the same in Italy. Meloni's party there, Meloni, Fracture's new friend, and that's why Starmer's new friend. And the point Nick made that Farage's party is second in 92 Labour seats is a point that's clearly not lost on Starmer, is it? And Starmer does know how to milk the workers. This ordinary bloke, stockbroker that he is, but he's good at it and has been very successful, despite the fact that the Tory party obviously hate him to death and have done their very best to marginalise him, but they haven't been able to put him down. Just from a final point of the party and the programme, I think it's, I thanks for saying that there's going to be a discussion about this at the end of the year. It gives opportunity to try to think through carefully what we could all contribute to that. But I just want to make this one point, really. It's very difficult to get the balance right, isn't it, between having a programme that is so thin and just a list of minor key points that anybody who identifies in some vague sense with Marxism thinks they could sign up to it, and then having a programme that requires members of the group to have the right line upon the Nagas in India. I noticed that the CPGB, PCC have recently fallen out with a New Yorker, well-known Trotskyist, Dan Lazar, over the question of the right attitude to have towards Hamas. that, I think, might be a fairly good example. If we take the case of Hamas, are we going to insist that all members of the group, despite regarding themselves as followers of Marx in some sense, that people are going to be expelled because they've got the wrong line on Hamas or on Hezbollah or on Iran? Or, you know, we can all continue that list forever, can't we? So I think that's the problem we have to face. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Richard. Really excellent points for consideration. Posing questions quite sharply there about how a party would organise, how it would be democratic, what we would expect from members and so on. Things that we've got to talk about. John, I'm going to call you back in briefly, if you will. I'm going to make a couple of points myself and then going to call Will back in to respond. John?
I've got yeah, hi again. This pension issue, it's going to be interesting because there's been no impact assessment done in, well, there's been no data done in as much as who's taking up pension credit or not. And so over the winter, there may be a lot of excess deaths. And that could very well, you know, bounce back on Labour. And the other issue, talking about the right, apparently Tommy Robinson is coming to London on the 26th of October. I'm not sure where he is at the moment. He's on holiday still, I think. But apparently he's coming back and he's calling a demonstration and he's got a video. He's got a video of the riot and he's going to show the video and make points. Yeah, and my understanding is that when he comes back, they will arrest him. So I don't know what's going to, because there's a situation regarding what he did last time in Downing Street, showed the video. He should have, you know, turned up at court, but he didn't. And so what they did, they didn't issue a warrant, but what they've said is that when he comes back, if he doesn't turn up at the police station, then they're going to issue a warrant for his arrest. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly how this pans out. But it's called this demonstration. It's interesting, the fact that we know that there was 6 demonstrations called by some right-wing group over the weekend. On Saturday, wasn't it? Or over the weekend. And yeah, I'd like to know exactly what kind of reaction there was there in terms of one of our speakers there said that only 5 people turned up. So just wondering about the other 6 places. But him coming back and calling a demonstration, that's an interesting point.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Just briefly, if I may, before I call Will back in to respond to the discussion, I just wanted to make the observation about the far right. It's something that we need to keep discussing. I don't myself at this stage see fascism in the form of the Nazis resurgent, but the racism and the virulent anti-immigrant sentiment is a real poison in society at the moment, and it can't be fought by the reformists. I mean, Starmer can call out, I don't call Starmer a reformist at all, he's a purely capitalist bourgeois politician representing the capitalist class. But you'll see in his speech at Labour Party conference, while he criticised the violence on the streets, his speech, throughout his speech, there was a reference to national this, national that, national this, national that. It's all about the national interest. And so the narrative that comes from Starmer and also from sections of the left reformist political milieu is about how to solve things on a national basis. The party that we need has to be international and be the complete antipathy of the idea that you can challenge, confront, or change capitalism on a national basis. I just wanted to make that point. Will, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Nick. Richard, we're going to be talking about what's going on in the Middle East at our next meeting, so do come to that. Given that Israel has announced it's going to invade Lebanon about 2 hours ago, that should be an interesting discussion to say the least. So, Minnie, what I mean by
I think it's beginning. I think it's literally happening as we speak.
is it happening as you speak? Right.
Literally.
Bloody hell. Minnie, by residualization, what I mean is that it's a kind of it's a welfare state that is only there for the poorest if you're on benefits across the board. So eventually they will want us to have us in a position where if you're in work, you pay for your own healthcare. Yeah, and the hospitals are being PFI'd and the whole thing is being run by capital. So that's basically what I mean by that. And the point you make on and that'll be across the board of all services, I think. The point that you make about and somebody brought up about the winter deaths was made by Labour in 2017, where they had some research done which showed that 4,000 elderly would die because of if you took away the fuel allowance, and they seem to have completely forgotten about that. And that was before we were in a situation where energy prices have risen so high. So the data will be very, very interesting, although I do think people will be slightly inured to the number of dead following COVID, but we should make the most of it that we can without any question of doubt. I agree with Jeff Barr made the point that they will in the chat that they will struggle to implement their program, and I think that's exactly right. They will struggle to implement their program, and people will fight back, but they will need somewhere to go. They will need a political party and a political organisation to relate to, or a campaign that they can relate to. And I think that's really important, which brings me to the question of, people are mentioning the far left and the fragments, and it's a really big problem. I think it is. I think for over the last 20, 25 years, we've had small far left groups who have been associating with left bureaucrats in various ways in order to kind of create a new party. But the left bureaucrats, in the end, were more afraid of the far left than they were of the far right, of the Labour right. So Livingston chopped off the left having supported him for such a long time. Livingston just chopped them off. I don't think Corbyn would be comfortable in an organisation with what was described as the sectarian far left groups. And I don't think many of the people who regard themselves as sensible left social democrats or left socialists would buy into that. And I think that's part of the problem we face, is we've been dancing around that for quite some time. And I don't think we should privilege either. We shouldn't privilege Corbyn nor the SWP in the formation of a party or trying to create a party of the left. I don't think we should do that. I think the key points about the party that we would want to create is that it's democratic, accountable, and it has a socialist program. That's it. Now, we could argue over different aspects of foreign policy, and I'm sure there'd be a fierce argument if we got a lot of the left in, because I'd be arguing with people about Ukraine, people who support the Ukraine war. I'd be arguing with them about that. There'd be arguments about trans rights. There'd be arguments about lots of things. But the thing is that if it's democratic, accountable, and socialist, and aims for a socialist society, not some, kind of society that Corbyn's program was actually about. I mean, Corbyn's program that many of us got behind was actually pro-NATO and called for for governments to actually meet their budgets and not to break the budgets. It was left social democracy basically. So we would want something that answered a lot of the questions that people face, and say to them, look, this is what we would do. These are our answers to the problems that you face, and we know who the enemy is. It's not the migrants, right? It's not people on benefits. It's capital. It's so obvious that these people are the enemy, and we should point people in that direction and argue for the kind of politics that attacks capital and attacks capitalism. And actually, we've gone so far down the track of neoliberalism and late capitalism now that even, a demand that people should have control of their own energy supplies because it's a common resource of the earth is a massively radical demand. that it should be under the control of workers and consumers and not big business across a whole sections of industry and energy and supply, health, and all of it, they'd be central to the programme. But also central to the programme is that we would replace the non-democracy we've got now in terms of bourgeois democracy, a very weak form of democracy, with a socialist democracy where working people will control their fate, and we wouldn't tax the rich, we'd expropriate them.
Thank you very much, Will. Excellent discussion. Thank you all for participating. Thanks to Will for his introduction and summation. Just very quickly, I just want to go through the upcoming meetings. As I said at the beginning, we meet every Monday fortnightly. On the 14th of October, 1 year of genocide and the threat of a regional Middle East war, we're going to be discussing the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, now Lebanon. So put that in your diary. On the 28th of October, I'll be introducing a discussion on water as one of the essentials of life, arguing that the crisis in the water industry demonstrates that the capitalist class is not fit to rule. On the 11th of November, we'll be discussing the outcome of the election, the presidential election in the United States. On the 25th, this is a new one to add to your calendar, we've got a discussion. The police, what are they for? Do we need them? And then on the 9th of December, we've got new Workers' Party, new Left Party, new Socialist Communist Party. What sort of party should we be fighting for? That will be dealing with some of the issues that have come up in this discussion, including collective and all of the other Corbynite projects that have been set up or are in the process of being considered. We have a different agenda, a different proposal, as just set out succinctly by Will. I just want to raise two more things. On the 16th of November, I think everybody here should get the bulletin that we send out. If you read that bulletin, we've advertised a meeting on the 16th of November, which we'd like you to look at and see if you might be able to come to that, because that will be discussing the politics of this group, which have been outlined by those of us who organised TAS, the politics of talking about socialism, and also what can we do to organise it and develop it into the sort of putative potential party that we've been discussing. That's the 16th of November. The details are in the bulletin. And finally, I hope this will be good news. We're in the process of producing a postcard, which we and hopefully you can use when you go to events or meetings or demonstrations and distribute to advertise talking about socialism and try to win new people who might be interested in what we have to say, and it assists the basis of the question of organising. So with that, I'd like to thank you all once again, and we will see you in a fortnight's time. Good night.